Getting ready to change the oil in the 9T. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that skid plate. That's going to serve two functions. Primarily, so when I'm removing it, I don't have to worry about the exhaust pipe being hot. But also, when I get back from the warm-up ride, I'm able to access the drain plug easily without having to take that off. Also, I've kind of got a metric for the average temperature that my bike runs with the skid plate on, and I want to check and verify that it's not running any warmer than it typically would if the skid plate were off. So I'm also going to check that while I'm on my warm-up ride. But with that, I'm going to take it off, and then we're going to go for the warm-up ride. I'm going to go ahead and spray this down with some tire and wheel cleaner. Just let it sit on there while I'm doing the warm-up ride and while I'm changing the oil. What this is going to do, it's going to loosen up any of that contamination on the bottom of the skid plate. Basically bring it back to looking normal again. Alright, now we're just going to let it sit like that. 5-minute test ride to get it warm. It is up to operating temperature. I'm going to give it about 5 to 10 minutes to cool down so I don't completely burn myself when I go to take the drain plug out. Thus far, the oil level is looking good as I expected, but it is a little darker than I like, which is why I'm changing it. Got the kickstand up, obviously, so I can free up my working area a little bit. Just pretty cheap in some respects, so I've got the bubble wrap down there at the bottom to lie on so I don't dirty my back or pants. Have my 4 quarts of Advantech 15 W50. That's a can of Seafoam just for later. That's my filter and the crush ring, and then I've got my piece, the Rizoma piece for taking off the oil filler cap, the BMW Bosch oil filter wrench, and then the 8mm hex to take the drain plug out. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and take the drain plug out and get her draining. One thing that I think everyone should be cognizant of, unless of course you're perfect or incapable of making mistakes, go ahead, take the key out, right? And then what I do, I like to put a piece of tape over there, and that's just to remind me, hey, there is no oil in the bike, do not start it. I know it seems like an extra precaution that you shouldn't have to take, but all it would take is you making that mistake one time to realize you had really messed up. Just a little Rizoma spanner to go ahead and loosen this oil filler cap. So now I'll just spin it off by hand. It's rather warm, so what we'll do, we'll go ahead and set the spanner down here and take it off with this handily placed paper towel. It was there on purpose. I'd put it there before for just that purpose. And then we'll let that cap and the little spanner lie down there until we're ready to put it back on. Because I need 2 hands to do it. So one thing you want, a breaker bar or a ratchet with an 8mm hex on the end. I like to have a paper towel ready to set the drain plug on and one to actually wipe it off once I get it off. Now the drain plug is actually located under the sump, just there in the middle of your screen. You can see it. Got it still dripping. It actually all came out really fast. That's kind of the point, I suppose, of getting the bike up to temperature. But we're drain plug, nice and cleaned off. Oh, I'll say, maybe I should look at investing in a higher rim oil drain pan because it kind of splattered everywhere. So we'll give it a little while longer. Once that kind of slows down and or stops, we'll go ahead and take the oil filter off, which is right there. Took off the skid plate so that we could access the drain plug. And in the meantime, I had sprayed alloy wheel cleaner on it just to get cleaned up. It came out very nicely, but something interesting I thought would be of note to those that think running a skid plate on a primarily street bike isn't necessary. See all those little dents and dings? That's from rocks and dirt and whatever debris that I'm going over in ordinary road riding. So for me, I'm not willing to take the chance at puncturing the sump on the bike. That's probably a 1 in a million chance that I'd even do that. But once again, the boxer engine pulls like a tractor, plenty of power, plenty of torque. I don't think the, 1 or 2 pounds this piece of aluminum makes is really a giant sacrifice, especially when you consider the protection that you gain when putting it on. So I thought that'd be interesting. Down, so we're going to get ready to take off that oil filter. Something I wanted to note before we did that is you'll notice I still have the crush washer on the drain plug. I'll leave it on there just to verify that I did indeed take it off. Sometimes on these boxers, these Camhead boxers, it has a tendency to stick up there. You see in the middle of your screen on the bottom of the sump. Make sure you get that off. Having an old crush washer below a new crush washer kind of defeats the point. And the same thing goes for the O-ring seal with the oil filter, and I'll show you that after we take it off. Make sure that it comes off of the sump. Just had a visit from my wife, and she pointed out that I shouldn't be wearing a $70 ex officio shirt, but real men wear their good clothes to change oil in. No, I'm just kidding. Stupid men do that, and I guess I'm stupid, so. Drain over, and I've got my aluminum piece. It's actually the same piece that the BMW technicians use for taking off the oil filters. It's worth it. Just get something quality from the beginning. You won't have to buy it again. Now we're going to go ahead and twist it off. So you can see there that seal is still on, so we need to go ahead and get it off. Stuck up there. Just like I said, it might be. Very important to get that off. Once again, if you have an old O-ring from an old oil filter, just below the new O-ring with the new filter, it's not very effective. So make sure you check for that. Alrighty, now comes the fun part. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take this crush ring, put the new one on the drain plug, and then we're gonna take out the fresh oil filter and examine it, make sure it's all good to go. Is when I take off the old crush washer, I immediately bend it so I know that is the old one, and I don't make the mistake of putting the old one back on as a new one. Now that I've done that, I've put the new one on, and we are good to go with the drain plug. Taking the new oil filter out and examined it. It looks good. You see this little rubber O-ring around the top. That's the same as that. That's the old one that came out. That's what gets stuck to the bottom of the sump, and that's why you have to make sure that it's not there, that it's not stuck to the sump, because I mean that's an entire extra quarter inch or so they'd have sandwiched between the old filter or the new filter, the new O-ring, this sump, and then you'd have this old O-ring sandwiched in between, so that's not good. So make sure and check that. So if you're curious in the part number, that's it there. But now that we have the drain plug and the filter ready to go, we're going to go ahead and get the bottom of the bike back ready to put new oil in. We're actually going to dab our finger in a little bit of oil and put it on that O-ring. What that's going to do is lubricate that O-ring and keep it from crinkling or wrinkling whenever we apply torque to it. Speaking of torque, the torque spec for tightening this oil filter is 11 Newton meters. So in SAE, that translates to 8.11 feet-pounds or 97.36 inch-pounds. And my wrench reads in full inch-pounds, so I round it up to 98. On there, torqued to spec, which once again, 11 Newton meters, 8.11 pound-feet, or 97.36 pound-inches. Now we're going to move on to the drain plug. Threads by hand. Please make sure that you do not cross-thread this, or anything for that matter. Cross-threading is always bad. Once again, now's the time to check. Make sure you have that new crush washer on, which we do. And so go ahead and thread that in all the way as much as you can by hand. And now we're going to torque it down to spec. Wrench up to my larger one, just because this actually is what I need for the torque specs of the drain plug, which are 32 Newton meters, and that translates to 23.6 pound-feet. So I personally just round up to 24. I don't think 4/10 of a foot-pound is going to really make a huge difference, and I'd rather slightly, very slightly over-tighten than to under-tighten. New filter in, torque down. We've got the drain plug back in with a new crush washer in and torque down. Now for me personally, the next step is to go ahead and clean this underside of the sump. I mean, when else we get the opportunity to do that? Plus, I just don't want burn oil all over the bottom of this thing. I like my bikes to be clean at all times and at all places, so that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to I'm gonna go ahead and put the skid plate back on. If you're wondering, I have these blue mechanics paper towels folded over and sprayed with a non-ammonia glass cleaner like that. One, so it doesn't scratch my headers on the way up. And two, once I get it mounted, I'm gonna use those to give it one last wipe down on the bottom. So it serves kind of a dual purpose. Maybe it's a little OCD, but that's just me. Fun part, we're gonna put oil in the bike. For frame of reference, you need to keep an eye on your sight glass. So you can see there, just barely, there's a little red circle on the inside of the sight glass. The bottom of that red circle is minimum, the top of it is maximum, and basically we're gonna add oil until it gets up to that maximum level. For oil, as I'm sure you've guessed, we're using BMW Advantech Pro 15W50 weight. This stuff is awesome. I've had excellent experience with it. Bike runs well. If you're using a used funnel, make sure that the interior is free of any contaminants. You don't want anything other than oil actually going into the bike. So with the first 3 quarts, you can pour in pretty freely, not really having to look at the sight glass. It's this 4th one. I've had experiences where sometimes it needs a full quart, sometimes it needs closer to 80 or 90% as opposed to the full quart. So pay attention to the sight glass on that 4th quart. Now we're gonna get to pouring. To the max line, now we're gonna crank it up just after we replace the oil filler plug, and then we'll make sure everything's good to go. Full line, and then I also replaced the oil fill plug. I've got the little spanner there just in case we need to add more. In fact, from our 4th quart, we still have about 400 milliliters left. So it only took 60% of the bottle in that case, so that's kind of cool. So now we're gonna go ahead and crank it, turn it over. We're gonna keep an eye on the bike, make sure it's not running abnormally. If it does, we're gonna immediately shut it off. But really what we're gonna try to do, we're gonna run it for 5 minutes, getting up to operating temperature, and then we're gonna let it sit for another 5 minutes. We're gonna check the sight glass, and it should be right in the middle of the sight glass. If that's the case, we're good. If not, we might need to add a little bit of oil. And if it's over, in fact, we need to take a little bit out. But it should be directly in the middle. Bike is done cooling off. Like I said, we just ran it for 5 minutes to get it up to operating temperature or close to it. And then we gotta wait 5 minutes for the oil to drain back into the sump. Then we can check the level. But in the meantime, what we're gonna do is actually gonna dispose of this oil and this oil filter properly with one of these recycling cans. Personally, I just put the oil filter in the recycling can. Whenever I take it to get recycled, yeah, they have to pour the oil out and then kind of fish that out, but it's easier than trying to put the filter somewhere else and it just leaking all over everything. So I'm gonna get that done while we're waiting on the bike to cool off, and then we'll check the bike. It's warmed up for 5 minutes, got it up to operating temperature, and then we've let it drain, the oil drain back down into the sump, so now we can check the sight glass. And as expected, it's about halfway up. Now, so long as it's in that sight glass, you're good to go. Preferably, it should be close to the middle. The reason for that is when it's towards the bottom, obviously, you're kind of running closer to the minimum, which, in my opinion, isn't good. Also, remember, when you really get the bike up to operating temperature, you're riding it hard for 30 plus minutes, that oil with temperature is going to expand. And then once you do something like that, go for a hard ride for 30 to 45 minutes, that expanded oil is actually going to be closer to the 3/4 mark, which I personally, that's where I like to see it. So right there is just about perfect. I wouldn't be tempted to add any oil. If you do, do it in like 50 milliliter increments just to be safe. And remember that the oil will expand as it gets warmer. So other than cleaning up the cardboard and properly disposing of used oil, that's pretty much how you do an oil change for a BMW R Nine T. I actually just took the bike out on about an hour-long ride just to get it thoroughly up to temperature, just to see really where the oil level is. I've also let it cool down for about 7-8 minutes now, so it's between that 5-10 minute window. And we are right at, well, a little bit above half, and I'd call it 5/8. So that's pretty much perfect. So yeah, that should pretty much do it. The bike's running great, feels great, and now I don't have to change the oil for another 3,000 miles or so.